All right, we're live. Cool. Welcome to the Coachlogik Mentorship. Today, Josh and I are going to talk a little bit. Well, we're going to talk a lot, probably the entire time. But today we've got a bit of a sort of free form chat here. We're going to talk about a few different topics. Josh, are you ready for this?
I am so ready, and I prepared by buying a coffee from one of my favorite coffee shops in Morgantown.
The
This
gas
is
station?
second only to Sheets. Uh,
Okay,
yeah,
nice. Very cool. What have you been up to? I haven't talked to you for a bit.
yeah. Been cranking out some pretty long days with like assignments, coaching, everything else that's going on. You kind of know how it is, right? It's just like
Yeah.
just kind of one thing after another, meeting, assignments, work. Um, so rounding out the semester. Today will be my last day because I'm going to take an exam after this, and then I'll be done until the 13th, I think, which starts the summer semester. Then I'll have a class and
Mhm.
then research hours. Kind of working on just long-term projects. I think as you get more and more into like bigger professional spaces, those projects take up more and more time. Of like in
Yeah.
May, you fill out this document and get it approved, and then you start data collection, and then you do write up. So a lot of that stuff has a lot of lag. So just kind of working on a few things. Um, been writing quite a bit more. So I've been enjoying that. What about
Cool.
you? How's everything been on your end?
We're just cranking away every day on the app. Uh, getting everything done, getting things built. Um, I'm excited. We had this really great moment last night where we met with somebody who's a weightlifter, but he's also a very senior level, um, like literally go to market strategist for a very big tech company, and he gave us like so much awesome insight as to kind of like how to present this product, what is it, how to like sort of we explained it all to him. And it's funny because you'll explain everything, and it kind of, people's eyes will glaze over like, oh, okay, that's cool, like you talk about all this stuff, and then he's kind of getting excited about it because he's a weightlifter, but then it's kind of like us sitting down trying to figure out like just a lot of stuff, how to communicate this and that. And it kind of got me thinking a lot about like just in general, um, when we talk about stuff on here, right, is a good example, sports science, and you talk about like whatever, you know, what as detailed as you want, right? What is the velocity of the uh, uh, whatever myofibrillar action or something, insane detail of like what, like this nerding out on stuff. And we talk about it because we care about it a lot, but also because it's, to us, that is the vehicle to get to the thing you want to get to at the end, which is lifting bigger weights.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of this kind of thing has been this struggle, I think, for me in trying to like, how do you get people excited about this stuff to the point that they maybe don't like love it, but they care about it, they understand it, and they can, as coaches, take it and use it to do something better for their athletes.
So
Or
I think the perspective here, because when you bring this up, yes, Timothy, this is party time. This is peak Max Ada and Joshua
yeah,
Gibson. Um, when you bring it up to coaches, it's like, oh, here's this great new thing that can help improve practice and help improve your coaching and help improve your athletes' performances. And like, I don't know, I'm skeptical. But in more professional realms in science, it's like, oh, here's
mhm,
a new great technology that could help you
right,
improve practice and improve what you do and improve your ability to work. People are over the moon about it. Like people are willing to pay for it and people want to try it out. They want to test it, right? They want to make sure it's like a valid and reliable
mhm,
thing to use. But realistically, like people are excited to get new technology, to see someone that's innovative and brings innovation into the space. Whereas coaching, it's like it's an uphill battle. You have your solidified ways of doing things, and it's like, oh, but here's this thing you can do to expedite and improve what you're doing now. And it's like, yeah, but then I would have to try something different and work hard to change it. And it's like, yeah, but that's like being a coach. That's being a professional. That's doing a good job.
Well, what's interesting to me is like this whole conversation kind of talked about like all this detail, all this stuff. And we do that a lot. And what you realize is that like sometimes you maybe lose sight of, or you are forgetting that the most important part of all this is helping people do better. And, we think about and talk about training, not to prove ourselves right or to prove someone else wrong or to be like, oh, well, we know all the answers or anything like that. It's to say, how do I get so-and-so to make a PR? How do I get a little better? How do we take someone to a meet and get them that one more lift or that one more, kilo on the bar? Because if you can get that, it's like a key that opens up the door to, to success, right? Like, oh, we figured it out, right? We've kind of locked in on how to get to the next step.
Well, and that's literally on all fronts, right? That's like, if you can do that repeatedly and reliably, like your coaching is going to bring in more athletes. It's going to produce better athletes. You're going to go to bigger meets. You're going to have a better experience as a coach in the sport of weightlifting. If your ability to execute and like pick up on and execute on information you have improves, right?
Yeah. And this is more of a rant, I guess, but this whole thing kind of comes down to this idea that like, the mentorship is about, and all this stuff is really about the idea of like, sharing in that so that the base level of what we understand or what everyone knows has risen. When that rises, it pushes the higher high up, right? When everyone understands like the difference between, when everyone understands like a concept like progressive overload, then you can build on that. But until most people grasp this idea, it's hard to, you get less people that could potentially improve on it, right? Because some people just don't understand it. It takes time to sort of get it into the community. So,
I'm kind of cutting you off, but I think this
you're good.
It's like a great conversation where it's, if you don't have a general understanding of a concept or a well understood, like agreed upon understanding of a concept, you can't change the concept. So if people don't know progressive overload, you can't then refine that construct to say, well, it's technically not what we thought it was. It's slightly more nuanced. And I guess that's like, you talk about mechanisms of hypertrophy. It's like, if you've never thought about that or understand it at just a base level, how do you create a different understanding of it when emerging information comes out? So if you think like, oh, we just build muscle by doing higher reps. And it's like, well, what about when load is high enough and you have less reps, but you get a similar response? It's like, oh, well, I didn't even have a good enough understanding to be able to change it. So it's like, it's the idea of kind of raising everyone's level and understanding of the sport by which it can be further raised and changed and improved over time. And the best professions, right? Like all of the professional organizations, they all have a good understanding of the basics at the top. Like no one doesn't. And everyone, the next person who wants to fill that spot, the next person who's like, I want to be head coach, they might have a better understanding because they're working their tail off to be able to replace the person in front of them. So I think that's what it's about. It's like, how do we compress all coaches?
Yeah. And the analogy that I think about a lot. So you probably know this, but there was a period in my life where I was a blackjack dealer. It was very early on when I moved to California. Actually, James the Thinker Smith hooked me up with the job. But so in blackjack, there's a well-established and a well-understood playing strategy called basic strategy, which is essentially just the most obvious choices you should make based on the cards you have and the cards the dealer has. So, it's like if the dealer has a 10 showing, right? And you have let's say a 10 and a 5, you have 15, like you have to hit, because probability would say that they have 20. The dealer has 20 and you have 15. So you have to hit. And so like it's very simple. It's just like there's a set of like, if you have these cards, they have those, it's very deterministic. But what it is that if you play by this strategy, you have, you've elevated your potential chances of being successful, right? And that's kind of like what we're talking about here, is like, it's not so much like teaching you something that's going to make you way better. It's like the first step is like getting everybody to make mostly the right choices, or always the better choice when they can. It's giving you a chance to say, hey, what are the best possible choices here? You got to choose that one. And it might not be the right choice in the moment. You might not win that because, maybe you hit, whatever, 15 and you bust. But the point being is like, that's the right choice. And so I think that's largely where we're trying to get to, or I see it as us trying to get to with all this, is like, how do we elevate everyone so that right off the bat, you're a coach, you're an athlete's training, whatever, they do some lifting, they've been training for a couple of months and they're not making progress. What's the choice? What's the right choice? What's the next thing that you should be doing? How do you make the right adjustment? What do you look at? What's the variable, like, versus saying, I don't know, we'll try small lob squat program, So I think that's kind of the essence, right? It's not about saying this is the right answer. It's like, this is the right decision-making process. Go left, go right, So yeah, I think that kind of was like this moment for me last night. I was like, oh yeah, that's like how we should think about what we're trying to do here, is getting everybody the basic strategy, getting them on the same level so that they can, they can go from there and do, whatever they want to do, and kind of embellish on that and make it their own thing.
Well, and I know you love my quotes. That's like one of the highlights of your day is when I post a quote or bring one up. And there's one it talks about beginners, and it's something along the lines of, beginners often mistake their intuition for like, something helpful, when in reality it's just bias. And the idea is that you have to have such a theoretical background, a practical background, a ton of experience to be able to have developed heuristics and an intuition that gets you closer to making good decisions. Otherwise, you just have a bias you have no idea of, or you have like no sense of like how that decision-making tree is supported. So it's like, oh, this person looks really bad today. What do we do? Intuition says, maybe we got to deload. Maybe we got to take time off. Maybe we got to, or maybe we push really hard. Like, oh, they're in the process of being overreached. Like, let's layer on some fatigue. It's like, that's like a bias, and you don't even know where you picked up the bias from. So the idea is to have a good understanding of the training process, or a great understanding, so you can say, yeah, performance today doesn't really matter. Realistically, like, come back in tomorrow, we'll see if the prescribed workout is, kind of in that Goldilocks zone. If it's not, we'll see if the next day, it's like, okay, what's the pattern then? You had one bad day, the next day was great. Every week we have one bad day. That's a pattern. That's fine. We don't have to overreact. It's like, just manage the weight. So I think a lot of that is like, yeah. And it feels like a circuitous process of getting there, because most coaches get into coaching by being an athlete. They do weightlifting, and then they think, I love weightlifting, therefore I want to be a weightlifting coach, versus I've been educated in the sciences. I went through some sort of like coaching and performance science degree. I have, whatever credentialing. Okay, I want to be a coach. No, it's like, I've done a snatch, therefore I can teach a snatch. So it's going to be this incredibly painful process of like, let's take, 1,000 steps back, and let's learn some like basic, anatomy and physiology that we can then apply and say like, yeah, all of the decisions you make are closer to good because you did this work on the back end. And through the mentorship, through the education we're putting out, through the writings and all that stuff, really that's what it's doing. It's like, let's take a few steps back so we can take a few more forward after we reach the same point we were at prior.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's like such a great way to sort of point out, yeah, like it's so easy to make like decisions that you don't realize are based in or are stemming from something that is either an incorrect piece of information or like a bias. Like, well, this person looks tired, so we should do less work. But, that may not be the right answer. And it's based on something that, is just kind of an assumption. Or, oh, well, we did a lot of whatever before, we haven't trained a lot, or whatever it is, then we should do this. Humans are not, the human body is not a very deterministic system, meaning you do this, you get that out at the end. We've definitely found ways of like, there, for example, like training for hypertrophy. We know there are, best practices, right? And we know that if you do X, Y, Z, you're probably going to get, 1, 2, 3 as a result. But there's a lot that goes on in between those 2 points, and there's a lot that potentially factors into that. Just because you did 10 the German volume training for biceps and triceps 6 months ago, and you made some progress, doesn't mean that doing that again is for legs is going to have the same effect. So yeah, there's a lot of that. I think that the way I want to try to, I guess, train coaches or communicate to coaches like how to do things is much more about like develop a good understanding of the foundations of this stuff, and then develop critical thinking to make better choices, better trade-offs as you go about this process, so you don't end up in a spot where and I think every coach has been here, where like the shittiest feeling you can have as a coach is when you feel like you're doing an okay job, right? And then someone quits or someone leaves and goes to a different coach, and you realize, you have that moment of like, what, like I'm just not, I'm not actually doing a great job here. Like all these decisions I think I'm making are not good. They're like, I'm not tracking the data that I should, or I'm not really sitting down and doing the process of, deliver training, track it, evaluate it, make adjustments. And so that's like it's like that sucks. And you realize like, okay, like, I don't want to do that anymore. So I've got to develop a system of getting there.
Yeah. I think it can be tough too, because kind of similar to, when you write something and someone gives you some feedback and there's red pen all over it, it's like, oh, they're directly critiquing me as a person. It's like, they're critiquing the work. They're saying like, oh, if you adjust it, it'll be better. And I think when you have analytics and you write a program and it's like, this obviously didn't work. It's like, okay, what's the red ink? Basically, it's like, what's the process of improving it? And it's what it sounds like is through the coaching platform, you'll have access to data and information that basically is red ink. It says that was a huge spike in volume. You had more, complaints of like musculoskeletal discomfort. Therefore, those things might be related. That's a little red ink of like, maybe you titrate in volume over time a little bit more slowly. Maybe you have bigger decreases over time. Like maybe you make adjustments to the programming. I think the only way by which that can happen is to have it visualized or displayed effectively. You can't really effectively adjust something that isn't like captured and visualized well. You're just making best guesses, and it's like, I'm not going to think, well, we did, I'm thinking about the week of training. We did a bunch of work. Let's do a little bit less. It's like, what does a little bit less mean? It's so ill-defined. But if you can say like, let's take 10% off the top, then we'll see what happens. And it's like, that might be more or less correct. How is, and maybe this is some insight into the platform for people who will be interested in using it. Like, what is the process of visualizing information or being able to use information or analyze a program that has been written so that you can effectively like use the red ink to make adjustments?
So, the first layer of it, as far as like integration of this, is like a lot of coaches don't do this already. They don't really sit down and break things down with data. And the reason is because it's just like, it's cumbersome, right? And it's like, if you're going to coach a bunch of people, you're spending most of your time on technique, and you're going to get a lot out of that. But the fundamental thing is it has to be accessible. So like the data, like obviously in the app we're building, the data tracking is automatic, right? So every time you write a training session and someone does it, you're collecting that information. And the goal is to just grow the amount of information we can collect so we can draw better we can draw better conclusions from that data or deliver better insights about that. So there's a few ways to do that. You have data visualization, which would be like graphs and charts, which are they're okay. I mean, it's like you can look at a chart and do whatever. I don't think that's necessarily the best way. And then you have basically the thing that I think really will make the platform much better is our ability to use like large language models to query data from the analytics database and then summarize that for a person. So rather than you having to go to the analytics page and look at a chart of snatch progress or snatches, you could ask the system in a chat type feature like, hey, tell me about my snatch progress, or tell me about the snatch, give me the parameters of my snatch volume and load and all this stuff for the last 2 months. And it can read it like a person and communicate in natural language, which I think is the way that more coaches will be responsive. If I sat down with you and you would go in the gym, you and I are, I stopped by West Virginia for some reason, like, hey, how's your team doing? And you're like, oh, I don't know, this one girl's kind of struggling, like she's not getting stronger. And I'd say, oh, well, what's going on? And you're like, well, we do this, this, and this. We look at your program. I might say like, oh, you should probably add more 90% plus lifts.
Yeah.
Like you should do more heavy singles. That to me is how coaches will actually use data and implement it. It's way more that to me than it is, hey, here's a shitload of numbers. People that want the numbers, it's there, but I want to be able to deliver something that feels like an assistant coach that's not like sitting there, just vomiting out a spreadsheet of numbers. We want to deliver something that, everybody would use and it would make sense to them, right? And then prompt them with the questions to ask. Obviously, people, if they don't know what to ask, that doesn't help either. So, there's a lot there, but I think the goal here is to make this as natural of a process as it can be, because once it becomes natural and it becomes easy to adopt, it'll start to grow and the practice will improve everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this idea, and I have a couple of questions. This idea of the numbers don't matter insofar as they're just anchored to a result. Like the actual number itself, like if you say, well, we did 500 snatches and we didn't make progress. We did 600 and we did, it's like 600 means nothing. I mean, it just means you're closer to the correct amount of stress for some reason to make progress. Realistically, like 600 is not a magic number. There's no magic numbers. There's no like classification system by which if you do this many snatches and this many clean and jerks and this many squats, you're going to blow up. You're going to have the best results you've ever had. And when you do find those numbers, it's like, this is a proxy for the stress we need. And I think this idea of what you're saying, where it's not just regurgitating data that's been inputted, like input and then spit back out. It's saying like, oh, here's some information relating to the data that's been put in, and here are some action items that can be spit out so that you can then just change practice and get closer to that like Goldilocks zone of the correct amount of stress. Every number, every data point, it's a proxy for stress, which is a proxy for like disruption to a system, which is a proxy for adaptation. And the adaptation ultimately, when like, brought together with like other changes, can lead to performance results. Yeah. So Timothy has a question. He said, I think it kind of relates. How do you prevent overreaching while pursuing concurrent training? And I'm assuming when he says concurrent training, he's not meaning like conjugate style training where you just improve many different qualities. He's talking specifically strength training and then endurance training. I'm assuming. That's my thought.
CrossFit. Yeah. I mean, the most obvious thing is management, is managing stressors, right? Is making sure that you're not, that you're not training with too much, too much training load at any one time, and that you're consolidating stressors that would be in the correct sequence, right? So that even though you're training concurrently, you're not necessarily trying to drive, the absolute limit of all volume of everything at the exact same time. Is the obvious answer there. I mean, don't do too much. The question, down the chain becomes more a matter of like, how do you actually set up the programming so that you can maximize the adaptations you make for all of the qualities without degrading the overall, effectiveness of training. So it's like you could flatten everything out and be doing all of your type of, all of your different motor qualities and training these things, but at a very small level. So it's all even and you're going to be fine. But then you're probably going to have a less significant, response to any of that because you just can't, stress yourself enough there. Then, it's a matter of trying to consolidate a bit and drive, the volume you can into those stressors. Now, without going into like something like block periodization, right? Where you just say, well, the logical conclusion of that is block periodization. It's just an augmentation of that stuff. It's an emphasis saying that you have to understand there's some limited resource. So you allocate, appropriately.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And I would say, like, think about what one modality gives you that the other doesn't. If it gives you, enough volume of training that you can put on muscle, it's like you probably don't need to have the other modality also do enough volume to put on muscle. It's like they're similar demands, but they're competing, and that like then too much is being applied to the same end. So I'd say for the weightlifting side, you're looking at more maximal strength in technical development. And then on the CrossFit side, you're looking at kind of like shaping the engine and then shaping the vehicle itself. And then those are like diametrically opposed, which is kind of the point of like maximal strength stimulus, endurance stimulus. And then to Max's point, this kind of gets into a conversation of block periodization, which is, maybe we do more weightlifting, more maximal strength work, more kind of like basic strength stuff, and maybe more basic endurance work. And then over time, it becomes like more CrossFit, more high intensity, more volume, and then the weightlifting and strength work kind of becomes decreasingly emphasized. But I would find ways to keep those threads within your programming. So when you have a strength, whatever you call it, like a strength metcon, or I honestly don't know what it's called. You might do some, snatch variation work to keep your technique sharp. Maybe do heavy set of 3 in the squat with like 2 to 3 RIR, and then maybe you don't even do down sets. You just go into a WOD, knowing that if you do maximal strength work, that's going to be a strong stimulus for maintenance. So you don't have to like beat yourself over the head with it to improve.
I would say too, it does appear that I think there may be a little bit of a step back. Like there's been some decent research now on like minimum effective volume for like, strength or hypertrophy. And it does seem like, the ability to reduce a lot of these things to a pretty low level of volume and still hold on to gains is viable solution, right? So, you might look at it from a more practical sense as like, how much can I reduce the volume of something while still not even just maintaining, but maybe still making a little bit of progress versus, ramping up the other qualities as I need throughout the training cycle. And so I think the boundaries of that are less extreme than they seemed years ago, right? Like, decades ago, it used to be like, don't do any cardio, you're going to lose all of your muscle mass. And that's just largely in practice, never even really shown up, but it was always a thing. Right. And so it's like, now we kind of understand a lot more about that. I think it seems to me like concurrent training might be the block periodization definitely for, a couple of decades really overshadowed the idea of this concurrent training, right? Or this idea of like, being able to train a lot more qualities together that seemed like they had an interference, right? And it does seem like that's sort of been say debunked is the wrong word, but that definitely is not the case from what we've seen.
Yeah, and I bring this point up every now and again, but if you look at professional athletes and high level collegiate athletes, they're doing conditioning, they're going in the weight room, and then they're going to practice, and they're still getting stronger. And caveat, nuance, whatever. Like, I think we play this like fatigue boogeyman stuff a bit too often. Of, well, you can't like do any endurance work, you're gonna get weaker, and it's like, that's not true. And it's really a process of like, how do I feel? Am I making progress? Okay, that's a yes or no decision. That leads to a decision tree of I should change it or I should keep doing it. And so if you make progress, it's like keep doing something similar. If you're not making progress, make some adjustments. And if you feel beat to shit, you're either doing your baseline amount of work is too low and you're having really dramatic spikes, or the baseline's too high and you're not having dramatic enough like troughs or like frequent enough troughs. So I would say you can start to manage training volume in that way. And that's the idea of block periodization, is like you can manage the size of each workout. You can manage the intensity of each workout. And with CrossFit, you can have a little more fun with it. I mean, if you want like a maximal strength session,
I don't know if I'd call CrossFit fun, but yeah.
For a masochist, maybe. For like a maximal strength workout, maybe you do a top single and then you have 6 singles on the 60 seconds at minus 10%. And it's like, oh, there's the quality. You're on a clock. It's going to be a little bit faster. Maybe you do 10 singles. It's like, okay, now we've got 10 singles at roughly 90% 1 RM. So instead of doing like 3, maybe 85, but instead of doing 3 sets of 3, we did 10 on a 60-second clock. That's more CrossFit-esque, and it's like maximal strength-esque. So I would say you could just kind of play around with stuff. And if S&C taught me anything, or strength, being a strength coach taught me anything, it's like you need an approximation of the stress and what's going to deliver that. And then everything else can kind of shape to the preferences of the sport or the athletes or the situation. Let's see. We have, I think, one more question off that. Are internal cues overrated? I would say that I kind of get upset now when they use like Gabriella Wolf's research to say like you can only use external cues. I'm going to use whatever works. And realistically, like you use it all the time. And a lot of that's like, I'm just going to say something. What happens? I'm going to say something different. And and this idea of like optimization for cues is like a weird, like evidence informed rabbit hole that people get into. I would say maybe one might lead to a better result immediately and one might not. But I would say like, you can't say like, hey, feel your feet dig into the ground, or like feel your quads tighten up, or, something where it's like directing that sensation inside. I'll tell people all the time, like, reach your arms up, create pressure or tension in your shoulders. It's like, yeah, I mean, that like might take them away from the lift, but it's 60%. We're just working on a position. Yeah, go ahead.
I think with cues, the bigger mistake people make is not trying to say things in a variety of ways. And I think a lot of times people get stuck and they pick a thing and they say it over and over and over, and they just kind of dig this like groove in their brain of like, someone goes to do a jerk and they scream the most obvious thing, like reach, or you go to do a clean and it's like, like it's like when someone squats up, like, well, what other direction are they going to go? But it's like they just get stuck on that saying the thing, and then they think that more intensity is what helps. Where if you're saying cues and they're not working, try another one. Try to say it differently. That to me is the more important thing. Is like, I don't think internal versus external is like going to be this thing that like imagine Ilya Ilin goes up to in 2014 and in Almaty, he goes for that second clean and jerk and he misses it, and he goes back and his coach is like, oh man, I told him an internal cue and it like totally screwed him up, like shit. And then like he's about to go out there and his coaches are just like, okay, what's the external cue to give him to make that lift? It's like, no, I mean, just try a variety of things, try to frame some of it more externally, I guess, would make sense. So like try to focus on it in ways that are maybe leaning that way. But if you say something like push your knees back and the lift gets better, you did your job and it worked perfectly.
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely true.
Yeah, we got a couple other questions here too.
Yeah. Let's get into those. And Timothy says it's fun because I hate myself or enjoy pain? ? Who really knows? Probably a combination. Jeremy, who we've recently both been on Jeremy's podcast, which is like a fantastic show, super well done, well led. So excited for those episodes to release. Jeremy says, for coaches who haven't started tracking data yet in their program design, or for newer coaches, what are the main metrics to start tracking and checking?
Yeah, I would say for me, the most important things you need to track are like right off the bat is going to be track total volume, so total reps in each movement group, track the distribution of those reps into intensity zones. So, how I'm doing 1,000 reps in a month, where are they broken up? What is how many of them are at 60% or 70 or 80? It doesn't have to be exact. Like you don't have to like the buckets are fine, right? Like you want an idea of what the distribution, how heavy is this 1,000 reps? And then I would track a couple other things, like I would track specifically the number of lifts, let's say over 90%. And it's not like 90% is some magical number, but you basically want to know like the number of kind of heavier attempts someone is taking. And then, you could track what Sergey and the Russians call the K value, which is essentially just like this coefficient of intensity, which is all of your volume of all of your main movements. What is the sort of average intensity of that? And what that does is it does similar to the average intensity, which is it paints a bit of a picture as to how heavy does this person train. We know they're doing a lot of heavy lifts and high volume and all these things. What is the sort of like range in which this person is training? That's just from a tracking standpoint. Those things would give you a bit of a picture to say, okay, are we kind of in this, moderate range? Are we in that sort of acceptable range, or is it like I've got way too much volume at 70, 60%, so it's way too light, or I'm really just like overloaded with like way too many heavy singles and high intensity stuff, and I have no volume in the program. Those will give you that perspective. And then what you do from there is just try to shift your volume and training to match a more, sort of typical distribution. And then from there, you start to make adjustments again.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that we kind of get so impressed with the like rules we use as coaches. Or it's like, I use this rule of I have to count everything from 60% up. And you get so impressed with it that it's like, well, in this program, I don't want to count everything from 60% up. And it's like, well, just try something different. I mean, I don't think any volume from 60 to 70% is special comparatively to like 70 to 80% necessarily. So feeling like this rigidity towards the first thing you heard of, like, I heard Zygmunt tracks it from 50% up, or Puros says like 80% up, or Dragomir 70% up, or whoever it is. It's like that's kind of like a method. It's a way of conceptualizing and quantifying it. But the most important thing is just like, there's a volume, there's a way you've gotten there, you did that consistently, and you're sticking with that. And then like being able to adapt over time. So I think your point's correct, and I like that. I would just add that there is like mobility baked into that, to where you don't have to feel locked into the initial constraints that you put on. When did you start tracking everything and being more kind of like adherent to the process of like numbers and volumes and changes over time?
I started more seriously doing this probably about 2018-ish. When I got really like serious about seeing like the results from it because I applied it well. Um, I would say that like in the past, I understood it and I did some of it, but I didn't really like, it was more of like a trying to corroborate things I already thought, right? It would be like, oh, well, I'll just kind of calculate all this. Oh, look, it's kind of what it should be. And it's like, that's not really what you're doing. You're not trying to like prove anything. You're just trying to discover something. You're trying to look at it. So yeah, I've been doing it for a long time. I would say that at the higher level, it makes, let me rephrase that. At the higher level, it is more critical to do.
Yeah.
I think that it's very easy. It's so easy in these sports to fail. It's so easy to not get better, right? And we know this from just looking at it. There's just not that many people that are super strong.
Yeah.
Right? If it was super easy, everybody would be pretty strong because you just go in the gym and do the thing and you get there. So it's very easy to miss the mark in a way that is meaningful enough that you really don't make a lot of progress. And so then, that being said, it's very important at the highest levels that you apply this, I believe. I think if you look just even at USA weightlifting, Spencer Arnold, probably the most data-driven coach currently in that top rank. Kate Vibert at World Cup made tremendous progress from her performance in Qatar, which is only like 5 months earlier, right? Which was also a personal record.
Right.
That kind of progress doesn't just happen from max out Fridays and winging it and just kind of, like, yeah, he had an approach and he follows it. And I know Spencer, and he does like a good job of like tracking information and using that to drive decision making. When you look at a lot of other people, like just kind of going in and doing it for fun recreationally, like, yeah, you could do that, but you might be snatching 110 kilos or 100 kilos like for the last, for the next 6 years. And you might here and there hit a PR, but you can't really identify what caused that, or was there any indication that I was going to make that earlier? So yeah, I mean, I would say high level, it definitely makes a huge difference, and it should be applied earlier on because it's not something that's like only for people who are good. Everyone doing a training program should be keeping track of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both had stories where we had started tracking, and then we made extreme adjustments, and it's like, oh, that paid off hugely. Like they paid dividends. To where when people are really in shape, like I've seen someone go from, oh, we did this like one-off thing, we hit a huge personal record, and then the next like training program we did, by the end of it, we were taking that weight for a triple, or for whatever it is, or like doubles and volume, and it's like that's only made possible by doing the correct amount of work and by doing it like the correct intensity so that you're not just beat to shit. Because again, anyone can go in and just kind of push. Anyone can just go on and load more weight onto the bar until they miss. But it's like, how do you manage that so you're doing it strategically in a way that's progressive over time? That can be tough too, because that takes work on the athlete's end to execute well. But it feels good. I mean, it feels good when it's like on both ends going well, and you've kind of got it like locked in, so that like you go in, you train, you're better. You train hard because you're better, and then you get better because you train hard,
Yeah. And it's like the thing I will say is that when you're actually tracking this information, or you have it at hand and you use it to make decisions, what you end up with is the feeling of being able to direct training properly. Instead of like when you have no idea of what someone is doing and how they're responding to it, other than like when you watch them lift. And you're like, oh, those look hard or those look easy today. You might make an adjustment on the day, but it might not be the kind of thing where you're like, oh, like this is hard training. It's Wednesday of this week, and you're looking really beat up and tired. But I know that this week is 300 reps and like it's going to be the hardest week. So like that's okay. It's very easy to not have any idea. Did we do more this week than last week? Without actually calculating. The analogy I always use is a diet. If you don't track the amount of food you eat, it's impossible to lose weight. Like unless you go extreme and you just starve yourself all the time. But like if you don't actually know how many calories you're eating, it's very, very likely you're not going the direction you want to go.
Yeah. Well, and then the effects of extremes are that much more emphasized or exaggerated, right? Like, okay, well, I'm just going to cut out all carbs. It's like, well, now you one feel like shit. You don't like dieting. You're hungry all the time. Like, here are all these other problems that extend from the extreme. Let's just train hard all the time. It's like, now things start to hurt a lot more. And now my technique's pretty bad and I feel kind of slow and I don't want to train. And it's like, it's a direct result of making a crude, overarching or far-reaching decision of, instead of just being detailed and process-oriented, we just say like, oh, maybe we'll go lighter. It's like, now you're just weak as shit because you want to go light. Your technique's not even good because you didn't pick the right exercises. So now you're just kind of weak and kind of fast, but not moving super well. So it's like that idea of, and I guess this is the point of all this, with you and I and Chris Tabor and whoever else is involved. Other sports do this well. Why doesn't weightlifting do it well? And it's like, because no one's creating a process or an expectation that this is the standard. I mean, like, truly, even the people filtering down the credentialing or the certifications, it's like, oh, just do this commonly successful strategy. That doesn't help anybody. The biggest, and I haven't really used this in this context before, and it's kind of funny that I'm going to. If you teach someone to fish, they'll eat for a day. Or no, sorry. If you give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day. If you teach them to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. If you give someone a periodization, I'm using that kind of loosely and kind of like commonly, that's what they're going to do. If you just teach them about the process of creating programs, they're going to write an infinite number of programs and they're going to have fun and play around with it and become better or worse at it. The worst thing that you could do is say Texas method is the best program. Or, or like block periodization is the best thing, is like commonly understood as like 10, 5, 3, 2, 1. That's like the most unhelpful thing. So from the top down, it's got to be more rigorously implemented. And then from the bottom up, it's got to be more openly accepted to a process and work. And I can't just do this as a side hustle that I kind of check in and out of. I don't know. I just kind of get bothered by that. It's like, oh, well, I'm just a weightlifting coach at a local club. It's like, you can still do a fucking good job. Like, that doesn't preclude you from doing a good job.
Right. It's more just to say, like, I think it's the diet analogy for me is the thing that makes the most, it's the most obvious connection, is like, it's very unlikely you'll have much success in a broad sense with a lot of people if you're not, if your diet plans don't actually include calculation of the amount of macros and food you're giving someone. Whereas it seems like a training program is almost this like totally, like in weightlifting, it's like, well, whatever, just do some of this and some of that.
Yeah.
And it's like such a strange thing that it's not a more common practice, that like,
I think it's just, I think it's probably, what it feels like is so many people get into weightlifting through doing it, that their coach is their mentor. Here's a strategy. This is how we do things. And it's like, it's random reinforcement. It's like, oh, I had success. Oh, I didn't have success. Oh, but I had success again. So like, this is good. Instead of, could we just like raise the floor and the ceiling all at once by understanding a process and like this, the science and the scope of what the knowledge we have. To the diet analogy, before we get into Timothy's question to kind of round out, really bad nutrition coaches, like their impact could be hugely detrimental. It's like, hey, we're going to eat, 1,000 calories a day, and it's just going to be celery and mustard. That's the way we're doing it. And
rat paste.
What's that?
Two tablespoons of rat paste.
You're going to, with a side of binge and purge. But like, you could give someone, you literally could like work, you could do such a bad job that someone starts having disordered eating, because you're just like ignorant and don't care. And as a weightlifting coach, it's like, hey, we're going to do Bulgarian this block. And it's like, now someone's dealing with this chronic issue because you didn't want to do the back end work of what does it mean to peak the weightlifting movements, instead of like, oh, we're doing a block. Like, the fuck's a Bulgarian block? Literally, like we're doing a Russian block, or we're doing, I don't know, like all these weird buzzword, blocks of training. It's like, that makes no sense. And that's like the most, backwards way or something like that of doing it. Anyways,
Yeah.
Timothy's question, just in the rant on bad coaching. In a vacuum, is it more important to improve general strength, squat and deadlift, or heavy percent weightlifting first?
I mean,
Max,
it depends on, it just depends on where you're at. I mean, if you, both of these things will need to improve. The the thing I would say is that probably the best advice I could give is that there is no shortcut. There is no way to squat and deadlift and press your way to a bigger total without incorporation of snatch and clean and jerk. It's like it just doesn't work that way. Even though we see super high correlation between these movements, and we see many lifters with giant numbers, the process has to be such that during certain periods of time in training, the focus is on more general strength adaptations. So increasing the limit of your squatting ability or your deadlifting strength or whatever it is. This is done in conjunction with everything else. So I would say, like, it's not that it's more important one way or the other. It's just, when is it the priority versus when is it not? Having the biggest squat, 2 weeks before the most important competition of your life is not as important as having the best consistency and technical expression in the snatch, right? That's going to drive you much more forward. So I would say the think of it as like periods of time that are focused on one thing versus the other. If you're referring to more like overall, right? If you're just saying what's first, what's most important, there's two schools of thought. One would be to improve general qualities as much as you can, then start driving the results of the lift up. The other would be to say, become as technically efficient and as much as you can, then start getting strong. I'm not sure if one of the other practices is potentially better than the other. My inclination would be to say lean more towards the technical emphasis first. Try to develop as great a technical skill as you can. If you look like, the reason I think a lot of good lifters start when they're young, outside of the physiological benefits of developing, speed qualities at that age, is they develop a sense of lifting heavy weights, lifting weights that feel very heavy to them with very little fear. And I think that's probably like the sort of psychological, you could call it like driving with the handbrake on for a lot of athletes that start later in life, is that they get into it. They have some degree of physical strength and ability, but they don't have that sense of like just dropping under a bar, diving under a weight and expecting it to land, or that they pull on something and it feels heavy, but they feel confident they can do it. That's why you take a power lifter, and it's like very rarely would you find a power lifter that like has deadlifted 800 pounds that would have confidence to drop under a 400-pound clean.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, they're plenty strong enough. They just don't possess that, that they haven't lived in that existence where like it's something that would feel normal to them to do. But if you took a lifter who was like a kid and they trained from day one and they just that's normal, and you go under the bar no matter what it feels like, at some point, if they get to be that strong, they'll be clean and jerking huge weights.
Well, and I think to that point, you can, and this is kind of a cool feature of what I'm doing. It's like we get the 13-year-olds in, play football, and we literally like once a week, we'll do, push press behind the neck. We'll do cleans, but we'll do like warm up with front squats, go muscle clean, power position clean. And then it's like, honestly, if I wanted to, we could do that 52 weeks a year. that like basic progression where we never go to a different position, but I can kind of watch them and go, yeah, we kind of look good enough to go above the knee. Like, let's go down. Whereas when you have an adult come in, you can't just go the same drills and same bar work every single week, every single session. You can't extend the process that long for various reasons, right? Like 13-year-old has a different length of a career or like interest or, dissociative ability than an adult who kind of can like pick up on it fast enough and wants to kind of put some weight on the bar. And, you're like, okay, like, yeah, that's fine. We don't need to be perfect. So I think kind of what you're mentioning of you get used to lifting really heavy weights early on as a kid. You develop that ability to not be fearful of it. You also develop the technical reliability and like efficiency that every lift's not going to feel slightly different or look slightly different on the way up. So you can hit weights that are like really shitty and really kind of like prone to being more likely to lead to, maybe hitting your elbow on your knee or just having some sort of issue where you drop the bar on yourself. Because if you watch people at the international level, it's not that they don't get hurt and it's not that those things don't happen, but you watch them take maximal attempts and their technique's just like so locked in, their misses don't look anything close to being seriously problematic. And you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but their technique is just so consistent at all weights all the way up.
I mean, I would say that's I think in weightlifting, the at that high level, like lifters are very consistent, but I would say that like they may not be at the highest level as consistent as like a more intermediate level lifter. I know that sounds weird, but like I would almost venture to say like you look at some female competitors in like USA weightlifting that are like not necessarily the top national team lifters, but they could be extremely consistent.
Yeah.
Where like almost every rep is identical. And you see this like, let's say you look at like the 45 kilo class internationally. There are some lifters that look like they've just every single lift is the same. So it's like yes and no, but as you get even higher up to those like Carlos Nassar level, his lifts are not, they all follow the same plot line, but they that plot line includes like everything's going to be forward and you better get back under the bar. So it's like not always the most consistent, right? I mean, I guess it is consistent. It's the same thing, but it's like you said, it isn't that consistent, but it's definitely much more so than the lowest level.
Yeah, I mean, you watch like a CrossFit comp, right? And like every lift could look so different and like
right?
To a point where it's like you probably should just like not attempt that after a miss. Whereas you kind of said this, and I think this is more indicative of what I'm getting at. If you can take a weight that you missed 10 times, there's like you have to have something about your technique that's like protective of some sort of like acute injury because of like really shitty technique or just falling apart. Because if you watch someone at a CrossFit comp, if they try to take the same weight like 10 or 15 times, it's going to get horrendous eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering like if that's technical work on the back end, if it's just doing it well, if it's just like proper teaching progressions and like exercise selection over time, like what tends to lead to the ability to replicate the same technique under fatigue.
I would say my observation would just be that the lack of variation as far as the let's say you do a snatch and you do 100 of them, the less variation there is within those 100 lifts, not meaning you don't do other movement types, hang snatches or whatever, but the less variation there is there, the more consistent it's going to get, right? So it's like the less chances you are continually moving in wrong ways. And that stems from consistent submaximal training, right? And that's what drives that ability to replicate the movement over and over again. If you go really heavy all the time, your power output goes up, your strength goes up. Like you can be more aggressive with lifts, but they're going to be much more erratic.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We have a comment and then one more question to round out before we end this live stream, which is from Jeremy. As one of my coaches once said, next time you're too afraid to get under a clean, remember that some people will only ever deadlift.
Yeah.
And hey, maybe they even just sumo deadlift. So
Oh, wow.
one step down.
Jeez, shots fired here.
And then Justin O, this is more of like a, kind of like logistical question, coaching logistics. What would you do if a coach from another club DMs my athletes to join their weightlifting seminar?
That's a tough one. I mean, so I feel like my personal belief is like, and I've had athletes, quote unquote, poached from me and people leave and all this. The reality is like everybody's a human being and a grown person that can make their own choices. Like I don't own anyone. I don't have the ability to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do or what they can or can't do. I would always assume that like, whatever there is, like if somebody is, being asked to join another team and they leave my team, either that person didn't really want to be there in the first place, or they've been, I'm not doing a good enough job. Or the third option is that, they're being offered something that I can't offer, or maybe it's not, maybe it's a lie, whatever. It's like, someone offers an athlete I'm coaching $10,000 a month to go train with them. Like I wouldn't tell them to not go for it, man. Good luck. Yeah. So, I mean, I honestly just wouldn't even, I would just let it go. I mean, I think if you make an issue out of it, it becomes something that it maybe isn't, like people are trying to sell their stuff all the time, what maybe he's talking about me. Maybe I DM somebody to go to a seminar. It's like, yeah, people can make their own choices. That's my personal belief. I think there's a lot. Years ago, there was this whole poaching thing in USAW.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it's like, I mean, like you're poaching a 25-year-old you're like someone convinced a fully grown human being to go and quit their coach and sign up somewhere else. Like,
well, we got 50-50 cotton polyester blend. Mark.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you come over? You said you don't own any of your athletes, but I've been to Max's gym and you have personalized collars next to the door.
In the gym, the physical gym, they're not allowed to leave. We have them all locked in at night.
There's shock collars too.
Yeah, there's a mattress, you pull out, a little sleeping roll on each platform. You're staying here. We're not going to win the Northern California regional state championships if you don't get your shit together. And every day I make sure they know.
You got a cattle prod in the back. Yeah.
You just pressed out a 42-kilo snatch, buddy. That's not winning the 109s. You're not eating today.
I would, as much as like you want to get kind of like up in arms about it, it's like the people I coach, they would never be poached. Who like we've developed like a good relationship. They made great progress. It's been a successful like situation. They'd never be poached. On the other hand, like as a coach, can you look in the mirror and say like, I'm just doing a bad job? And someone
every day I do that.
What? Yeah. And it's like, you kind of look in the mirror. I'm just kind of doing a bad job. Does that make it more likely that people are going to leave? Are they kind of already interested? And like when that happens, kind of accepting of it. I mean, realistically. Brian says all of Max's athletes stay in the alley next to the gym. I've seen them. Yeah.
That's a rough
zone.
alley. That is a rough alley. I can't even describe to you. Unless you've been to the gym, it's like a war zone out there.
And people think you're joking, but
I'm not.
I've seen people like bare ass naked. Yeah.
They did clean it yesterday. Kush was in the office and he looked. He's like, "Oh, they're cleaning the street." And you look over and it's like, yeah, they moved a giant pile of garbage. Basic human level, like this is a definite health hazard. Tuberculosis spreads. Yeah.
Yeah, Justin, hopefully that helps. We're not saying like if you're a bad coach, you should be worried, but it's like, hey, they are adults. Do the best job you can, build the best club you can, like do what you think is right. You're going to pull the people in who want to be a part of it. People who don't feel like they want to be a part of it will go to, a different gym with different merch and different online programs. So it's not a you thing. It's just like it's a situation thing.
For sure.
Cool. That was a great live. It was a ton of fun. We got
Yeah.
a ton of questions, a ton of interaction in the chat. For everyone who's tuning in live, thanks for joining us. The coaching platform, it's on kind of on the final leg. I mean, we're about 5 weeks out from national, 6 weeks out. So there's going to be a booth. There's going to be a product. There's going to be something tangible that people can start to use and implement into their coaching practice. If anyone is interested beforehand in getting involved or checking out kind of like offerings, Max, where can you direct them so they can stay in the loop?
Yeah, I mean, check over the next week the Coachlogik.com. That'll be where we're going to post. We'll start the website set up there. But if you're looking for remote coaching, obviously you can work with me, teammated.com, or you can work with Josh or anyone else. And then if you're interested in weightlifting.ai, check out that website and check out the program. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and if you want to follow us on Instagram to see more great content for the live stream who just tuned in, yes, I can see how many people we have. Josh _ Phil WL, Max _ Ada, Team Ada, and then you'll find all the requisite links that will take you to the great and grand places of weightlifting, knowledge, and successful coaching. This was another free Friday for the Coachlogik brand / mentorship group, and we will catch you all next time.